Hello, whoever the new person is also. Enjoying your day, I hope, guys. Happy Independence Day if you are in America. Hopefully you guys have a nice barbecue or whatever. Probably gonna head out later tonight. Hopefully we can catch something nice though. So it's like 114 outside, and getting into a pool would be pretty nice. So I think that's fine. I don't think I ever did finish Wolves View, but that's a town. I'm not going to deal with towns right now, especially since we haven't really started. I just want to get the major regions down. As far as philosophy, I think that it's... depending on your setup, if you find that you're going to have like a region setup like I have, where the PCs are going to be in kind of a small region rather than kind of a globe-trotting event, I find that you have to figure out what your focus is going to be. My focus for the first few levels is probably going to be outside of the towns, so that's why I'm only developing an Offerfell, which is going to be the first town that the PCs are in. Since I don't really feel like they're going to be in the major songs after that. Major towns after that. I'm going to turn this down just a little bit too. This is actually too loud for me on my headphones. Alright. So, as I was saying, if you think that you're going to focus on the towns, then you really should develop the towns. Like, that should be your main thing. You should be focusing on your main city and then the roads, since the roads are going to be how they get there, and the towns. Me, I took a different approach. I feel like most of the level 1 through 3 action is going to revolve around the roads. And around the roads and the regions that the people are going to. So I really try to develop those right now and give them their own character. I feel like the first ones are going to be in an Offerfell that I create. I don't know how the other DMs are going to do it, but I'm going to revolve around an Offerfell and probably around Greenheart Thicket and maybe a Thunderdrum Break. Thunderdrum Break is kind of a gamble because the way I've thematically made it, it's filled with giantkin, which include like ogres and cyclopses and stuff, which is kind of not... it's not really possible for a first level group of people to engage with people like that. Hold on a moment. Alright. So, because, but the one thing that I did add in there too is I did say that there were other things. There are goblinkin in there. So there could be like a progression, which is another great idea. You give them the goblinkin, you know, your orcs, your goblins, your kobolds, and maybe you introduce the idea of the giantkin while they're in there. Like, say maybe they're raiding one of these kobold lairs and they find some sort of declaration the PCs do that the kobold chieftain gets from one of the giants that's like, you pay us or we're just going to crush you down. Another idea is that maybe you have some sort of fetish that associates them with it. Like, say maybe ogres have, say, a god king or something. You could have that god king symbol in there and then have the PCs investigate that at a later time. To answer the question, Biavin or Bijavin or whatever. The way I set this up, I'm going to try to make a long story short. So we made up this campaign. This area is going to be about 40 by 40. I really wanted to develop this small area. I also wanted to make it so that people could play kind of on their schedules. Right now I have a group of about a dozen people. And we found that the hardest thing playing Dungeons and Dragons as you get older is just being able to get everybody together because everybody has such hectic schedules. Even if you do decide to plan a specific day, which I've done for another campaign, sometimes things just don't work out. Like people have things that they need to do. And Other times it's just not incredibly feasible for you to run a campaign without that person. Either you don't have enough people, or that person's really important if you've been pushing story for that character at that time. So you really don't want them to miss out on it. You also don't want the people to miss out on anything really important, like if they're going to fight a dragon, you know, that's a really big event for characters. I feel like they all should be there. So the point is that we created this as... we wanted to make a bunch of like one-shots, and that's kind of what this region is all about. And to encourage that, we are going to have about 3 to 4 DMs that develop for this area. And you might think that that might be an issue, but it's actually not. Because of the idea that it's all one-shots, maybe 2 shots if there's a real big issue, you can you can build stories on your own, but you want to keep them kind of self-contained. We did this so that not one person needs to DM, so that we can all play. We are currently running this in Dungeons & Dragons Next, or we are going to be, which is the playtest for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, I guess you could call it. We wanted to try it out, and everybody kind of wanted to play. So we didn't really want to stick somebody with just the DM role. Also, people that have DM'd before, we wanted them to have experience with the new system, see how they liked it. That way we could give effective feedback. I feel I have a background in game design, so to some extent I can give them feedback, but it's really more theoretical stuff. And when you're in a playtest, you really should be giving them things that are based on your actual experience as well. So far, the mechanical things that I've suggested to them haven't really panned out. They haven't taken to them. But I feel like they've taken them into account, but in different ways. One moment again. Sorry about that. I don't know, my nose has been itching like crazy the last few days. But as for my involvement with the playtest, I mentioned that I made a suggestion. One of my suggestions, if you've been paying attention to it, or if you have a background in tabletops, you are familiar with weapon finesse, which is basically instead of using strength as a modifier to your attack roll, you use dex on a select few weapons. And that was a really good way to kind of help out classes like rogues or classes that used heavy dex and make them effective in melee combat, or at least help them in melee combat. The problem is that in the first playtests of Next, and it's still current, is you now no longer have the finesse weapons feat. What you have is you have weapons that have the finesse property. And what that says is basically when you're using these weapons, you automatically can choose either strength or dex as your option for both attacks and damage. That addition of damage is a huge thing, I feel, and it really pushed rogues into a place where I think they were just doing too much damage and they were way too effective in combat. Like, you were finding that they were just better than fighters at really producing in a melee scenario. They still had less armor, so they couldn't really like just wade into combat like crazy. But in Next, it seems like AC values are much, much lower. And because of that, if you could pump dex, which is a way to get a large amount of AC, you could basically almost make strength a dump stat. You could put everything to dex, and that would give you attack, damage, and AC. So it became this really powerful stat, and it still is to some extent. The way they got around it is they kind of manipulated the way that the new feat system is. They also kind of changed up the way rogue works in particular, and fighter. I think they did a decent job of it. I still need to do actual play testing to see if it's enough, though. I still think that finesse weapons are still very powerful. But we'll have to see how it works out. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to... One of the other things we did is I'm having everybody roll up 3 characters. Because again, we have these one-shot campaigns, and the idea is that basically anybody can play when they want. They just got to have these people together. Well, in order to facilitate that, we had everybody roll up 2 to 3 characters. That way we can have them at different levels so that they can compete. That way you're not sitting there like, well, I have a level 6 and everybody's only level 2. Like, how are we going to adventure? It also gives people the opportunity to try out classes. They don't have to make a decision on what they want to play automatically. They can make like 3 different characters, try out 3 different things. Another thing that we did in order to promote this kind of like one-shot experience and to stop people from leveling too much is we started to, or we're going to incorporate the E6, E8 style of play. If you're not familiar with this style of play, it was originally designed for 3.5, but it does work, I think, for every system that I've ever seen, and you just need to make some adjustments to it. The basic idea for E6 to E8 is very simple. The statement that they make on it is that for levels 1 to 6 and debatably to 8, your characters sort of progress an adventure in a type of gritty realism scenario where like everything is dangerous, anything can be really fatal, but your guys can still be very heroic and very powerful. They can engage in true adventure that is impactful, where they feel like the world is perceivable. Like, that's kind of a bad way to put it, but they feel like it's a world they can relate to somewhat. Once you start to get up to about 6 to 10, you enter kind of a new section of the game. And in this new section of the game, you start to progress to the point where your powers become almost supernatural in a way, but not overly so. The things you tend to fight actually tend to be the things that start to become less and less real and believable, and you're less able to suspend your disbelief. It's also around these levels of around 6 to 10 that we find that casters don't just hit their stride, but traditionally casters just destroy melee as far as efficiency. Many players have tried to debate me on this, and do not get me wrong, a tabletop game is very much about being a team. And you shouldn't think of it as trying to be competitive with the people in your party, because I don't feel like that's the spirit of the game. But I find once you get levels 8 to 10 that casters, such as like the cleric and the wizard, I think you get the idea, like real full casters, can just do everything that the other classes can better, as long as they have the ability to rest and set up. And quite frankly, most adventures that you're going to set up, they're going to be able to rest. They're going to be able to set up. As an example, you think your rogue's really important to pick locks. Well, then you get a level 2 Wand of Knock, and you can open up 50 doors, if you even need to. Like, just things of that nature are really... they just really break the game. And I don't mean that in a terrible way, like, oh, game's broken, can't be fixed. It's just, you need to realize that as a DM and as a player, that if a wizard or a cleric decides to optimize their character and really min-max, they can do a lot of shit. So back to my original statement. That tends to happen at this level between 6 and 10. And then once you go 10 to 16, you enter the wuxia style of it, where you're crouching tiger, hidden dragon, and just kind of ridiculous. And then once you hit, 16 to 20, then you literally are pretty much superheroes. Like, you can do things that just... there's a... you're level 6, and you're thinking that, 30 points of damage, man, I just hit that guy so hard. And then all of a sudden you're 16, and if you aren't taking a dump and doing 400 points of damage, then you're doing it wrong. It's just... it also just doesn't make the little guys look that intimidating anymore. And, there's the idea of Tucker's kobolds. that you can make anybody dangerous with the right thing, or you could give them an advanced template and give them class levels. That's true, but it's just not the same, really. What E6 and E8 attempts to do is basically you set a level cap of either level 6 or level 8, depending on how you feel it should be. With ours, it's going to be level 8 because of the powers you get at that level. We thought some of them were pretty iconic, so we went with 8. When you limit the level gain to level 6 or level 8, everything is dangerous. Like, and it kind of makes sense when you think of a medieval society or like a fantasy society. When you look at something like Hercules, the legendary journey or whatever, or like Xena, or all of those types of things, whenever they go in and fight something, it's always really dangerous, and like nobody can stop it. I mean, you think of, and even if that's the case, a level 6 character is still very distinctive from a common person. You know, a level 6 mage that rolls up into your town could easily reduce it to cinders. You know, a level 6 fighter could easily duel 10 people one after the other and kill all of them. So, like, you're still these powerful guys. But at the same time, if you run into a goblin raid could easily be very dangerous to a city. And a manticore, if you run into that, everybody that you know is in grave danger. So it gives this really sick realism to it, and it makes it so that the characters can feel powerful, but they're never untouchable. They always have this point where they need to go, you know, goblins are pretty weak, but there is 20 of them. They could potentially kill one of us. That's kind of the goal of E6, is to give you that type of gritty realism throughout your play experience. One of the other ways it accomplishes that is they promote nerfing spellcasting to, again, lower that gap. But they decide that, or I decided that we don't really want to limit casters like that. When you get to level 6 or level 8, there is progression. They suggest giving additional feats for the 3.5. Like, basically, if you would gain a level from 6 to 7, you keep using that experience amount from 6 to 7, and when you gain it, you gain a new feat. So that's how they kind of give progression there. For us, we're still trying to decide how we're going to go from 8 to 9. We're not quite sure yet, but we're going to tackle that as it comes. You know? All right, another question. Can't you just create a harsher environment so you don't turn into an immortal son of a god? Well, it depends on what you mean by an environment. If you're saying, could you create a... If you're saying, could you throw things that are more challenging at the players? If that's the issue, yeah, I think it is FF10. I'm just kind of playing it in the background. Yeah, FF10. It is Silence Before the Storm. If you make it just more powerful enemies, then it's kind of like an arms race between you and the PCs. And when that's what's happening, it's kind of like, how many monsters can you really throw at them? You already have a limited bestiary for D&D Next. The bestiary only has, I think, about 200 monsters, maybe even less. But you throw these stronger things. Okay, so what happens when they kill the dragon? Do you just throw another dragon at them? If you throw something else at them, how do you necessarily present it? Eventually there's going to be a point where it's just not feasible to present a new monster, or you lose this, what do you call it? You lose your ability of disbelief, and so it's kind of like, okay, the dragon attacked the town now. Okay, oh, say there's another dragon that attacked the town. Okay, now it's not a dragon, but now it's another really powerful thing. You know, ever since we got high level, it seems like this town is under attack by level 16 things a lot. You know, you could always make them go out and quest to accomplish these things, but that's kind of the idea, is it's just like you feel like you get into an arms race. And it just I just never felt personally, even when I got into higher levels, like it was as rewarding as really those tough, greedy fights at the beginning. If you're talking about the actual environment, there are things like Dark Sun and Ravenloft, for example, that do that. That's a possibility, but considering that we're going to have newer players also, I didn't want to put them in something that harsh. If you looked at 2nd edition Ravenloft and Dark Sun, those places were brutal. That's another reason also why I'm kind of sticking with E6, E8, is because since we're going to have newer players, I feel like introducing them to this style of play and keeping them at a lower level might help them pick up the game better. Let's see. If I had to guess, it would turn too close into a min-max gamble, which is already stressful and removes the fun in the other direction. The thing is when you min-max on a 6 to 8 game, you don't really get as far ahead as you would. If you min-max and gain 20 levels, then like there's a huge discrepancy between people that roll mechanical versus thematic characters at that time. Mechanical being like a min-max, thematic being, you know, I want a character to do this, and these things support it. When you have a min-max at a level 6, level 8, yeah, there's going to be a discrepancy in power, but I don't feel like it's as huge. It's the same idea as limiting a caster's ability. Casters are still really strong. A pro tip, casters, level 1, they still fucking kill an entire encounter with one spell. It's brutal. So, like, once you get up past level 6 or level 8, then, like, those casters kick in, and then those min-max guys get even further ahead, and it's just crazy. Let's see. It doesn't have to be quantity. You can make the dungeons cleverly made and dangerous forest. Yeah, I think that you can create also like clever dungeons and encounters on a low level as well, though. I think that's actually a good way to flex your muscles also with those things. I think one of the best ways to make dungeons clever in a way is to introduce traps and puzzles, but those can be done almost at any level. And when you're talking about traps can get defeated by a lot of things. Like, if you realistically look at how most traps will get triggered, there's kind of this joke. I heard in a forum post one time that a DM banned 10-foot poles because they set off traps way too effectively, and I'm almost inclined to agree. I don't believe it that much, but another example of the caster, for example. The caster casts Summon Monster level 1 and says run down that hall. And if there's any traps, sure enough, that thing's going to get blown up. And yeah, you could say like, oh, well, you can just design traps that get around that. Yeah, you could. But at the same time, like, you want to make the characters feel powerful. And if you're just creating traps just to circumvent what they can do, and that's it, then there's a problem. Now, should you always set it up like that so that they can get through it easily? No, but they should have a reason. Like, if the people that are running this dungeon had some sort of not precognitive, but if they had some sort of information before the adventurers came and they go, oh, well, they like to do this, then they might set up their traps to account for that. Or if maybe it's a very strong wizard, then they might try to account for that as well. But they're not going to set up every trap with the idea that everyone that's going to raid their tower is going to be a caster. They're going to have things for the other people to do. So in that case, I feel like traps are more effective at low level, so they can present better problems that way. With puzzles, puzzles have a hard time working because, again, the caster problem. Casters can just do so many things at high level that it becomes an issue. If you put an anti-magic shell, that's cool on once or twice, but again, they're going to hate you if you do it in every single puzzle room. Let's see. And again, you can apply these same concepts to a low-level dungeon. If you're talking about making the enemies clever, I actually have plans to do like DMing not podcasts, but like DMing sessions where I just talk about different concepts. And that's one of the concepts that I'm going to be talking about is kind of this goes for players as well as monsters. Do you play towards the intelligence of the character, or are you playing at the intelligence of the player? Another thing that I was going to cover in there was going to be, does the DM think outside the box? For example, it says inside many bestiaries that certain dragons will, like, they'll breathe on their breath weapon and then they'll come down and engage in melee. And if you're familiar with a man called Spoony, he runs SpoonyExperiment.com. It's a pretty funny, like, kind of comedy review thing, and he actually has a tabletop section that he does. And he talks about you need to make dragons feared. And he kind of alludes to this point is, if that's what it says in the bestiary how a dragon fights, but this dragon has 18 intelligence, is that really right? Why would a dragon, or anything for that matter, with 18 intelligence, which is supposed to be, like, pretty outstandingly genius, why would they not just fly around in circles and just breath weapon you? And then when it's waiting for its breath weapon to recharge, fly away. Then fly back and strafe you again. That's kind of the rough thing. I mean, that's not what it says to do in the bestiary. It says to breathe on them, go into melee. But why would the guy go into melee? I mean, think about if you're the dragon. And presumably, by D&D standards, you don't have 18 intelligence. I don't have 18 intelligence. There's not many people that do. If you were getting shot by a bow, and maybe a wizard shoots a few spells at you, would you rather take your risk with that? Or would you decide to land and let the guy with the 6-foot buster sword start attacking you with muscles like Bill Kazmaier? If you don't know who that is, he's like one of the most prolific strongmen in history. Why do they have 18 in? Well, for a variety of reasons. They're supposed to be almost like magical creatures, and on top of that, they tend to have such long lifespans that they acquire a lot of knowledge along their time. So it's like, again, like, if you're this super smart guy, I mean, imagine it's you, and you know that you have all these magical abilities and this fire that just destroys towns, let alone people. Like, why would you land? Why would you land? Why? Are you going to show off? Well, that'd be cool, except the first couple times that's happened, and by the way, it's probably happened a couple times if you're an older dragon. The first couple times that happened and you got beat up, you probably aren't going to do it ever again. Wisdom has more to do with... A lot of people relate to it as common sense, but it has to do with your ability to perceive things or pick up on things more. I don't think that reasoning that an enormous guy with a sword attacking you is a bad thing is something that you would do with wisdom, or that you would need wisdom to pick up on. Just seems like something that you would you would understand. When you're talking about stats like intelligence and wisdom, they're applied... It's just a keyword, basically, for a set of things that you can do. I was going to do another thing based on keywords, as it applies more to classes, but... How would I put it? Wisdom and intelligence in real life tend to be very hard to separate from one another. But they do try to divide it up in tabletops, at least in the D&D sense, into two separate things. And one of them is more like your ability to look at something and actually ponder what's the best course of action, which is more like intelligence. And then wisdom is like what most people would call common sense, common knowledge, your ability to perceive something quickly. It has to do with, like, perception is one of the things where it does, where you're able to see and hear. Another thing it does is, say, sense motive, where you're able to tell if someone's lying or not, things of that nature. Kind of, I guess your instincts would be a good way to describe wisdom as it applies in D&D. Yeah. The thing is like, with the scenario that I was talking about, you don't need to perceive necessary. Like, he obviously needs to see that the warrior is a big guy with a huge sword, but that's not too difficult. But yeah, it's. But that's the point that Spoonie brought up, and I think it's an excellent point. But it is jumping out of the game. I mean, that's not raw. Like, by raw, RAW, read as written, if you were to just go buy the book. That's not what they do, you know. A lot of dragons, they do something that I think an 18 intelligence person wouldn't do. I don't think that a 12 intelligence person would do it. But that's what they say they do. You also run into that problem a lot less in E8. Because most of the time, you're not going to run into a dragon in E8. And if you run into a dragon, you're probably going to be max level, and it's going to be one of those encounters that everyone's going to remember, and some people are probably going to die. As far as E6, E8 goes, they also have... You shouldn't make or think that that means that you're only fighting CR6 or CR8 monsters and below. You can actually go up 2 to 4 CRs and still actually compete. Once you get up past 2, it actually becomes very difficult, but you can do it. And those become... You can kind of tailor those to become like world-changing events too. That's kind of what we're planning for this. If the players fight a dragon, which in the current playtest are challenge level 12 monsters, if they do fight that, they're going to be level 8, and it's going to be a big event. Probably 10 players, maybe. I have to do test runs on that, which is another thing that you can do. As a DM, if you're ever worried about how something could work out, you can always do dry runs too. It is a very interesting way to do it. Like if you have another person that you trust that DMs, you know, kind of outside the group, you can be like, hey, can you go on RP tools with me and do a test run of this? Make sure it's not too difficult. Make sure it's not just going to kill them outright.